What if the person you love is only with you because they don't know your true worth? Jamal Langston, a commercial airline captain, kept his profession a secret to see if Vanessa, his new ambitious girlfriend, cared about him or just his status. But when the truth finally comes out, it's not just his identity that gets exposed, it's her intentions. And just when he thinks the story's over, Vanessa returns with a secret so dangerous it could cost her life. Deception, power, revenge, and one man who refuses to be underestimated. Stay tuned. This is The Final Flight. A warm, golden glow bathed the streets of Midtown Atlanta as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The rhythmic hum of passing cars mixed with the occasional bursts of laughter from cafe patios, where people sat, unwinding after a long day. Among them, in a small corner cafe nestled between a bookstore and a flower shop, sat Jamal Langston, his broad shoulders slightly hunched, his fingers loosely wrapped around a cup of black coffee. Dressed in a simple polo shirt and well-fitted jeans, he blended seamlessly with the late afternoon crowd. No one would have guessed that just hours ago, he had been soaring at 35,000 feet, commanding a state-of-the-art Boeing aircraft. That was the beauty of being a pilot. On the ground, stripped of his uniform and title, he was just another man. And for once, that's exactly what he wanted. Jamal had spent years proving himself. Coming from a modest background, he had faced skepticism at every turn. Becoming a commercial airline captain wasn't just about skill and hard work. It meant navigating an industry where men like him were still seen as exceptions. Even now, despite his achievements, he had learned one harsh truth. People often saw what they wanted to see. He took a sip of his coffee, the bitterness grounding him in the moment. That's when he noticed her. Vanessa Holloway walked into the cafe with a confident stride, her presence effortlessly commanding attention. She had an air of self-assurance, the kind that came from knowing she was attractive and used to admiration. Dressed in a sleek, tailored blazer over a casual top and jeans, she looked like someone who thrived in fast-paced, high-stakes environments. She ordered her drink, glancing around as she waited. Their eyes met, just briefly, but enough for a small smile to form on her lips. Not the polite kind, but one with intrigue. Jamal wasn't the type to initiate conversation with strangers, but something about her seemed different. Or maybe it had been a long time since he'd allowed himself to be curious about someone beyond casual encounters. When she turned, coffee in hand, she hesitated for a second before taking a seat at the table next to him. "You come here often?" she asked, her voice smooth, casual. Jamal looked up from his cup, a half-smile forming. "Every now and then. It's quiet. Good coffee." She nodded, taking a slow sip from her cup. "I was looking for a spot to wind down after work. Didn't expect this place to be so packed." He glanced around at the half-filled cafe, amused. "Yeah, real hard to find a seat." She let out a soft laugh. "Okay, fair. Maybe I just wanted an excuse to talk to you." Jamal leaned back slightly, studying her. She was direct. That much was clear. And while he had met plenty of women who approached him with a rehearsed charm, Vanessa's interest didn't seem forced. "So what do you do?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. Jamal hesitated, just for a fraction of a second before responding. "I work at the airport." It wasn't a lie. He just didn't specify how. Vanessa's expression remained unreadable for a moment before she nodded. "Interesting. I don't know much about that industry, but I imagine it must be busy." "Yeah, you could say that," he replied, watching her reaction carefully. There was no immediate shift in demeanor, no obvious sign of judgment, but he had been through enough to know that time always revealed people's true nature. They continued talking about the city, their favorite places, the best restaurants they had been to. She was easy to talk to, engaging, and for a moment, Jamal allowed himself to simply enjoy the conversation, pushing aside the nagging thought that always lurked in the back of his mind. Would she still look at him the same way if she knew the full truth? As the cafe lights dimmed slightly, signaling the transition into evening, Vanessa checked her phone. "I should probably head out, but I'd like to see you again." Jamal studied her for a moment before pulling out his phone. "All right, give me your number." She smiled, typing it in before handing the device back to him. "Don't make me wait too long." As she walked out, Jamal watched her disappear into the city lights, a quiet curiosity settling in his chest. He hadn't planned on meeting someone tonight, let alone exchanging numbers. But something about this felt different. Or maybe he was just telling himself that because he wanted it to be true. Jamal had always been observant. It was a skill he had sharpened over the years, both in the cockpit and in life. A pilot had to anticipate turbulence before it happened, read the air before it shifted. He had learned to apply that same instinct to people. 2 days had passed since his first encounter with Vanessa, and he had waited a respectable amount of time before reaching out. A simple message, "Dinner this weekend?" She had responded almost immediately, suggesting a place in Buckhead, an upscale part of Atlanta known for its fine dining and elite social scene. Now as he pulled up outside the restaurant, he couldn't help but smirk. He had expected something nice, but this was a place where the valet line stretched down the block, where men in tailored suits escorted women in designer dresses inside. A place where people subtly measured each other's worth the moment they stepped through the door. Jamal adjusted the cuff of his shirt, stepping out of his car. He didn't need validation from anyone here. He had long since stopped caring about impressing people who made assumptions based on appearances. But tonight wasn't about proving anything. It was about watching, listening, and understanding who Vanessa truly was. She was already waiting at the bar, looking effortlessly polished in a sleek black dress. When she spotted him, her face lit up in a way that felt genuine, at least on the surface. "You clean up nice," she remarked, letting her gaze linger. "So do you," he replied smoothly, taking a seat next to her. The conversation flowed easily. Vanessa had a sharp mind, quick wit, and confidence that was magnetic. She worked in marketing for a prominent firm, managed high-profile clients, and thrived in environments where connections meant everything. It was clear she was ambitious, someone who had mapped out her future down to the finest detail. When the waiter came to take their order, Vanessa barely glanced at the menu before selecting one of the pricier entrees. Jamal noticed but said nothing. He wasn't concerned about money. He had more than enough. But he had learned over time that the way people treated wealth, especially when they thought they were dating someone without it, spoke volumes. "So," she said, taking a sip of her wine, "tell me more about your work at the airport." Jamal took a slow breath, keeping his expression neutral. "I handle operations. Long hours, a lot of responsibility." Vanessa nodded, swirling her glass. "Sounds demanding, but stable, right?" He tilted his head slightly. "Stable enough." There was a beat of silence before she smiled, changing the subject. But Jamal had already caught it, the subtle calculation in her expression, the way she had weighed his answer against whatever expectations she had. The night continued, the conversation shifting to childhood stories, travel experiences, future aspirations. She was engaging, intriguing even, but there were small moments that Jamal couldn't ignore. The way she mentioned past relationships, emphasizing how well off her exes had been. The way she seemed more curious about who he knew rather than who he was. By the time they left the restaurant, the night air was cool, carrying the distant hum of city life. They walked toward the valet station together, and Vanessa hesitated before turning to him. "I had a great time," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You surprised me, Jamal." He arched a brow. "How so?" She smiled, though there was something unreadable behind it. "I don't know yet, but I'd like to find out." He let that sit for a moment before nodding. "All right, let's see where this goes." Her grin widened. "Good answer." The valet pulled up with her car first, a sleek, expensive model that suited her perfectly. As she slid into the driver's seat, she rolled down the window. "Call me," she said before driving off into the night. Jamal watched the taillights disappear before stepping into his own car. He tapped his fingers against the steering wheel, his mind turning over everything from the night. Vanessa was charming, smart, beautiful, but he wasn't convinced yet. Something told him that this was only the beginning. Jamal had always believed that people revealed themselves in small ways, through casual comments, fleeting expressions, the moments in between rehearsed charm. He had been watching Vanessa carefully, not just for what she said, but for what she left unsaid. A week after their dinner in Buckhead, she invited him to a gathering at a rooftop lounge downtown. It wasn't a formal event, just a get-together with some of her friends and colleagues. A chance, as she put it, to meet the people who matter. Jamal had agreed, but with quiet curiosity. He wanted to see how she introduced him, how she framed their relationship in the context of her world. When he arrived at the lounge, the atmosphere was exactly what he expected. Soft, ambient lighting, expensive cocktails, and a crowd that thrived on polished conversations and strategic networking. Vanessa was already there, laughing easily with a group near the bar. She looked effortlessly elegant, dressed in a sleek wine-colored dress that hugged her figure just enough to command attention. When she spotted Jamal, her expression brightened. "Hey, you made it," she said, moving toward him. She kissed him on the cheek, public but measured, as if deciding in real time how much she wanted to claim him in this setting. "This is Jamal," she said, turning to the group. "We've been spending some time together." The way she phrased it was deliberate, not a label, not a commitment, just enough to acknowledge him without placing him too firmly in any category. A man in a tailored suit extended a hand. "Marcus, Vanessa's told us about you." Jamal shook his hand. "Good things, I hope." Marcus smirked. "Mostly curiosity. You're the mysterious guy she's been keeping under wraps." Vanessa let out a light laugh. "Oh, come on. I haven't been keeping him a secret." Jamal observed the way she deflected, playful but non-committal. He wasn't offended, but he noted it. The conversation shifted, flowing between business, travel, and high-end real estate. The people in Vanessa's circle weren't just well-off, they were status-conscious, weaving subtle flexes into every exchange. At one point, a woman named Simone leaned toward Vanessa with a smirk. "So, Jamal, what do you do?" Jamal met her gaze, unbothered. "I work at the airport." A brief silence, just a half-second too long, before Simone recovered with a polite smile. "That must be interesting." Vanessa didn't correct the assumption. Jamal saw the flicker of hesitation in her expression, the quick calculation of whether or not to clarify. She didn't, and that told him everything. The night went on, and while Vanessa remained affectionate, Jamal could feel the shift. She liked him, but she also wanted him to fit into something more presentable. When they finally stepped outside into the crisp night air, Jamal slipped his hands into his pockets. "Nice group," he said. Vanessa exhaled, rubbing her arms for warmth. "They're intense sometimes, but they mean well." He nodded, watching her carefully. "Interesting moment back there, though." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "You didn't correct them when they assumed I was just a worker at the airport." Vanessa hesitated, then let out a small laugh. "Jamal, come on, it wasn't that serious." "Maybe not," he said evenly, "but it was a choice." She sighed. "I just didn't think it mattered in that moment." "What difference does it make?" Jamal studied her, his expression unreadable. "Maybe none. Maybe a lot." For the first time, she looked slightly uncomfortable. "I like what we have," she said carefully. "I just don't want people making assumptions about us too soon." Jamal let that sit between them. The words were smooth, diplomatic, but he had spent too many years learning to read between the lines. This was the first crack. Jamal had seen this pattern before. It always started small. Little hesitations, carefully chosen words, omissions that seemed harmless. But he knew better. People didn't outright say what they really thought. They revealed it in moments like these. 2 weeks had passed since the rooftop lounge. Things between him and Vanessa hadn't changed much, on the surface. She still texted him every morning, still invited him out, still kissed him with a warmth that felt real. But Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that something beneath the surface had shifted. And tonight, he was going to find out exactly how much. Vanessa had invited him to a charity gala in Buckhead, a black tie event filled with Atlanta's elite. "It's just a networking thing," she had said, brushing it off like it wasn't a big deal. "You don't have to come if you don't want to." Jamal had smiled at that. She was testing him. And now, standing in front of the grand entrance of the ballroom, adjusting the cuff of his tailored suit, he was ready to see how far this test would go. The moment he stepped inside, he felt the shift in atmosphere. Soft jazz played from a live band. Waiters in crisp uniforms carried trays of champagne, and the air buzzed with the kind of conversations that danced between casual arrogance and carefully curated humility. Vanessa spotted him instantly, her eyes widening slightly as she took him in. He had dressed for the occasion, sleek black tux, perfectly polished shoes, a presence that carried itself with quiet confidence. She had expected him to be out of place. He wasn't. "You clean up well," she murmured as he approached. "So do you," he replied smoothly, taking in the emerald gown that hugged her figure. She looped her arm through his. "Come on, I want to introduce you to some people." And that's when it started, the subtle maneuvering. She guided him from conversation to conversation, always with a careful balance. Not too much attention on him, not too little. She kept his introduction vague. "This is Jamal," without elaborating further. Each time someone asked what he did, he watched the way she stiffened ever so slightly. Then came the moment he had been waiting for. One of her colleagues, Michael Hastings, a sharply dressed man with the kind of practiced smile that screamed old money, leaned in with polite curiosity. "So, Jamal, Vanessa tells me you work in aviation." Jamal sipped his drink. "That's right." Michael tilted his head. "Pilot?" Before Jamal could answer, Vanessa laughed lightly. "Oh no, he's just in operations." Jamal set his glass down slowly. "Just." Michael nodded, clearly losing interest. "Ah, well, that's an important role too." Jamal caught it, the almost imperceptible relief in Vanessa's expression, the way her fingers briefly tightened around his arm. He let the conversation continue, but something in him settled that night. He had given her enough time, enough chances to show who she truly was. And now, he had his answer. Later, when they stepped outside for air, Vanessa exhaled, slipping her hands around his waist. "I think that went well," she mused. Jamal studied her for a long moment. "Did it?" She frowned. "What's wrong?" He let the silence hang for a beat. "You didn't want them to know I'm a pilot." Vanessa sighed. "Jamal, not this again. I just didn't want them making assumptions." "What kind of assumptions?" She hesitated. "I don't know. That we're serious? That I'm planning something long-term? People here talk, and I just didn't want them making it a thing." Jamal nodded, his expression unreadable. That was a lie. This wasn't about protecting their privacy. This was about perception, about control. And this was the moment Jamal decided he was done playing her game. Jamal had always been patient. He had learned early in life that if you gave people enough time, they would reveal exactly who they were. And tonight, Vanessa had done just that. The ride back from the gala was quiet. Vanessa had spent the first few minutes scrolling through her phone, responding to messages, and making casual comments about how successful the night had been. But Jamal barely responded. His silence must have registered, because eventually she sighed and set her phone down. "Okay," she said, turning toward him. "What's on your mind?" Jamal kept his eyes on the road, his grip firm but relaxed on the wheel. "You really don't know?" She huffed. "Is this about earlier? About the introductions?" His jaw tensed slightly, but his voice remained calm. "You didn't want them to know I'm a pilot." She shifted in her seat. "Jamal, it wasn't like that." "Wasn't it?" He glanced at her, catching the flicker of defensiveness in her eyes. "You made sure they thought I was just another airport worker." Vanessa ran a hand through her hair, clearly growing frustrated. "I just didn't want people assuming things. You know how these events are. People gossip. They make connections that don't exist." Jamal exhaled slowly, nodding. "So you thought if they knew I was a pilot, they'd assume what? That I was successful? That I didn't need to be hidden?" She didn't respond right away. That was all the confirmation he needed. They drove the rest of the way in silence. When they reached Vanessa's apartment, she hesitated before opening the door. "Jamal," she started, but he shook his head. "Not tonight." He didn't want another excuse, another carefully crafted explanation. He had already heard enough. She stepped out of the car, looking like she wanted to say more, but instead she simply nodded and shut the door behind her. Jamal sat there for a long moment, staring at the dashboard. This was it. The point where he had to decide. Was he willing to ignore what he knew, or was he ready to do what needed to be done? Jamal had spent years refining his instincts, both in the cockpit and in life. He knew when a storm was coming before it even touched the horizon, And tonight, as he sat alone in his apartment, staring at his phone, he knew he was in the middle of one. Vanessa hadn't texted since she got out of the car, and neither had he. It wasn't that he was waiting for an apology. He already knew she wouldn't offer one. Not because she was cruel, but because she didn't think she had done anything wrong. That was the part that bothered him the most. The next morning, he went about his routine as if nothing had changed. Coffee, gym, a few emails from the airline about upcoming flights. He had the next 2 days off before his next trip, and normally he would have spent that time with Vanessa. But for the first time, he had no desire to see her. That afternoon, his phone finally buzzed. Vanessa. Dinner tonight? My place? Jamal stared at the message for a long moment before responding. Jamal. Sure. This wasn't about fixing anything. It was about closure. Later that evening, Vanessa greeted him at the door with a glass of wine in her hand, looking effortlessly put together in a silk blouse and fitted jeans. She smiled as if the past 24 hours hadn't happened. I made pasta, she said, stepping aside to let him in. Figured we could have a quiet night. Jamal walked in, inhaling the faint scent of garlic and fresh basil. It was intentional. She was trying to ease the tension. They ate, talked about meaningless things. The weather, a new restaurant opening in Midtown, some client drama she was dealing with. She was carefully avoiding the real conversation. Jamal let her, for now. It wasn't until they were sitting on her couch, wine glasses half empty, that Vanessa finally exhaled and leaned into him. I hate when we don't talk, she murmured, tracing lazy patterns on his arm. Jamal didn't react. Then talk. She frowned slightly, straightening. Look, if you're still upset about the gala, I really think you're overthinking it. He let out a low chuckle. Of course, because it wasn't a big deal, right? It wasn't, she insisted. I just didn't want people making assumptions about us. Jamal studied her, his expression unreadable. Vanessa, do you respect me? Her eyes widened slightly. What kind of question is that? A simple one, he said, voice steady. Do you respect me? She laughed, but it was forced. Obviously, Jamal. Then why are you embarrassed by what I do? Her expression shifted, a flicker of something he couldn't quite place. I'm not embarrassed, she said carefully. Yes, you are. His tone was even, controlled. You didn't want them to know the truth. You chose to let them think I was someone else because it made things easier for you. Vanessa sighed, rubbing her temples. I just didn't want to deal with questions, okay? I've worked so hard to build a certain life, a certain network, and she stopped herself. And there it was. Jamal nodded slowly. You didn't want me to mess with the image. She hesitated. It's not like that. It's exactly like that. She exhaled sharply. Jamal, don't do this. Why does it even matter? We know who you are. We know what we have. His jaw tightened. Do we? She reached for his hand, but for the first time he didn't take it. Vanessa's face fell slightly. You're really going to make this a thing? Jamal leaned back, exhaling through his nose. She still didn't get it. This isn't about the gala, Vanessa, he said finally. It's about who you are, who I am, and the fact that those two things don't fit together. Silence stretched between them. For the first time, Vanessa looked uncertain. Are you breaking up with me? She asked, voice quieter now. Jamal held her gaze, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over him. No, he said. I'm just walking away. He stood, grabbed his jacket, and left without another word. Vanessa didn't call after him, because deep down she knew he was right. Jamal had expected Vanessa to call. Maybe not immediately, but within a day or two. Maybe a text, a late night, I miss you, or some carefully worded attempt at salvaging whatever they had left. But as the days passed, his phone remained silent, and that silence said everything. At first, he felt a lingering tension in his chest, a dull weight that he couldn't quite shake. Not regret, but something close. Maybe frustration, maybe disappointment. He had seen the ending coming long before it arrived, but that didn't make it any easier. The funny thing was, his life didn't change. He still woke up before sunrise, went on his morning runs through Piedmont Park, grabbed coffee at the same cafe where he had first met Vanessa. He still prepped for his upcoming flights, double-checked rosters, confirmed schedules. Nothing about his routine had shifted, except for the absence of her presence. And yet somehow he still felt lighter. A week passed, then another, and just when he had convinced himself that Vanessa had accepted their separation as cleanly as he had, she finally reached out. A late-night call. It was just after midnight when his phone vibrated on his nightstand. Jamal had been lying in bed, half awake, the low hum of the city filtering through his windows. The name on the screen made him pause. Vanessa. For a brief moment, he considered ignoring it. But something, maybe curiosity, maybe closure, made him answer. Hello. A pause, then a breathy exhale. Hey. Her voice was softer than he remembered, almost unsure. She was testing the waters. Jamal didn't fill the silence for her. I wasn't sure if you'd pick up, she admitted. You weren't sure if you should call, he corrected. She let out a quiet laugh, but there was no humor in it. Maybe. Another silence. Then finally she sighed. I don't know why I'm calling. Jamal didn't believe that for a second. Vanessa always knew why she did things. So why did you? She hesitated. I guess I don't like how we left things. Jamal leaned back against his pillows, staring at the ceiling. How did you expect us to leave things? She was quiet for a moment. I don't know. I just thought. She trailed off, then let out a frustrated sigh. I miss you, Jamal. The words hung between them, heavy and uncertain. Jamal closed his eyes for a beat. He had expected this. Not the words themselves, but the timing. Vanessa wasn't calling because she realized she had made a mistake. She was calling because she had expected him to come back first, and when he didn't, she had finally felt the loss. I know you do, he said simply. She inhaled sharply, clearly thrown off by his lack of reaction. That's it? What do you want me to say? She was quiet again. Do you miss me? Jamal let out a slow breath. He could have lied. He could have softened the truth. But what would be the point? I miss what I thought we had, he admitted, but not what we actually did. Silence. It was the first time Vanessa had no response. Finally, she whispered, So that's it? Jamal closed his eyes again, feeling an unfamiliar sense of finality settle in his chest. Not sadness, not relief, just certainty. Yeah, he murmured. That's it. He didn't stay on the line to hear her response. He simply ended the call. Jamal had always thought that breakups came with a certain kind of weight, but as the days stretched into weeks, he didn't feel burdened. He felt free. Not in the reckless, celebratory way some men did when they walked away from a relationship, but in a quiet, steady way, like shedding an old layer of skin, like stepping into clearer air. Vanessa hadn't called again. She didn't need to. The silence between them was its own kind of closure. One evening, after wrapping up a long day at the gym, Jamal found himself at his usual cafe. He ordered a coffee, took his seat near the window, and let himself enjoy the small simplicity of the moment. Long time no see. Jamal glanced up, surprised to find Tyrese standing next to his table, smirking. His old friend looked the same, relaxed, confident, carrying himself with the ease of a man who had nothing to prove. Jamal chuckled. You stalking me, man? Nah, Tyrese said, sliding into the seat across from him. Just happened to be in the neighborhood. Figured I'd check in on you. Jamal took a sip of his coffee. Check in? Tyrese shrugged. Heard about you and Vanessa. Jamal raised a brow. From who? Tyrese smirked. The streets. Jamal shook his head, laughing. The streets need better hobbies. Tyrese leaned back, studying him. So? You good? Jamal exhaled, rolling his shoulders. Yeah, I'm good. Tyrese nodded, taking a slow sip of his drink. Yeah, you look it. That was the thing about old friends. They could see it in you, even before you put it into words. Jamal tapped his fingers against his cup. You ever notice how people act different when they think they know your worth? Tyrese huffed out a laugh. Oh, for sure. He leaned in slightly. But here's the real test, bro. When you stop trying to prove it to them, life gets real peaceful. Jamal considered that for a moment, nodding. Yeah, I think I'm starting to see that. Tyrese grinned. Good. Took you long enough. They sat there for a while, talking about everything and nothing. It was a conversation without expectations, without hidden calculations. And for the first time in a long time, Jamal felt like he wasn't being measured. He was just Jamal, and that was enough. Jamal had thought the chapter with Vanessa was closed. Turns out life had other plans. It started with a phone call from an unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Jamal Langston speaking. A brief pause, then a familiar voice. Too familiar. Jamal. Vanessa. His grip on the phone tightened, but his voice remained steady. What do you need, Vanessa? A deep breath on the other end. I wouldn't have called if it wasn't important. He exhaled, glancing at the clock. Nearly midnight. She didn't do anything without a reason. Go on. I need to see you. Jamal let out a short, humorless laugh. That's not happening. Please, she said, and this time her voice carried something he hadn't heard before. Genuine distress. Something in his gut tightened. Vanessa, what's going on? A pause, then, quietly, it's not something I can say over the phone. Jamal rubbed his temple. Everything in him told him to walk away. He had done the work, moved on, made peace, but something in her voice, he needed to know. Where are you? Midtown. Can you meet me? A long silence stretched between them before he finally sighed. Give me 20 minutes. An unexpected reunion. Jamal arrived at a quiet lounge in Midtown, one of those dimly lit places where expensive whiskey and whispered conversations flowed in equal measure. Vanessa was already there, sitting at the far end of the bar, her back straight, fingers wrapped around a half-finished drink. She looked different, not in the obvious ways. She was still effortlessly put together, still carried that polished elegance. But something about her seemed unsettled. When she saw him, her lips parted slightly, as if she wasn't sure where to start. Jamal slid into the seat across from her. All right, I'm here. What's going on? She studied him for a long moment before sighing. I didn't know who else to call. His expression didn't change. Why me? Her grip tightened around her glass. Because you're the only person I know who won't lie to me. Jamal leaned back slightly. That was new. He waited, and then she dropped the bomb. I made a mistake, Jamal. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. If this is about us, it's not. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. It's about Michael Hastings. Jamal's brows furrowed. The guy from the gala? What about him? She swallowed hard. He's not who he pretends to be. Jamal studied her. For the first time, Vanessa looked genuinely shaken. And for reasons he couldn't yet explain, that made him listen. Jamal had never trusted Michael Hastings. Something about the man had always felt off. Too polished, too smooth, like someone who had spent years perfecting the art of deception. But hearing Vanessa say it out loud, that was unexpected. He took a slow breath, watching her carefully. Start from the beginning. Vanessa exhaled, staring down at her drink. I thought he was just another business connection, someone well-connected, respected. She hesitated. He made me feel like I was making the right moves, surrounding myself with the right people. Jamal said nothing, because wasn't that exactly why she had distanced herself from him? She continued, her voice lower now. But then things changed. I started noticing little things, conversations that didn't add up, deals that seemed too good to be true. And then, she swallowed. I found out what he's really involved in. Jamal's eyes narrowed. Which is? Vanessa hesitated, and that hesitation told him everything. He leaned forward. Vanessa? She finally looked up, her expression unreadable. He launders money, Jamal, and not just that. He's connected to people who make problems disappear. Jamal leaned back, absorbing that. So Hastings wasn't just some rich businessman. He was something much worse. Why are you telling me this? He asked, his tone even. She exhaled shakily. Because I made a mistake. I got too close, and now I think I might be in danger. Jamal studied her, his jaw tightening. And you think I can fix this? Vanessa shook her head. I don't know, but I know I can't do it alone. Jamal let out a slow breath. He could walk away. He should walk away. But as he looked at Vanessa, for the first time without the veil of ego, without the games, he saw something real. Fear. and Jamal Langston had never been the type to ignore a warning sign. Jamal knew he should have walked away. This wasn't his problem. But something about the way Vanessa sat there, her hands tight around her glass, her shoulders slightly hunched as if expecting a blow, made him pause. This wasn't the woman he had known. She was always in control, always calculated. But now, she looked like someone who had realized too late that she had stepped into the wrong game. Jamal exhaled. "Tell me everything." Vanessa hesitated for only a second before nodding, and then the floodgates opened. "It started after the gala," she said, her voice low. "Michael reached out, said he had some business opportunities he thought I'd be interested in. Connections, clients. I knew he had money, but I didn't think much of it. Then a few weeks ago, he started asking for small favors, introductions to people in my network, handling a few payments for business expenses." Jamal frowned. "And you didn't question it?" She let out a bitter laugh. "Of course I did, but everything looked clean. At first." Jamal knew that "at first" was always how it started. Vanessa rubbed her temples. "Then one night, I was at his place for a private event. I overheard a conversation I wasn't supposed to." She swallowed. "He wasn't just moving money. He was laundering it for people who don't exactly operate within legal lines." Jamal's jaw tightened. She had walked straight into a storm, and she hadn't even realized it until she was drowning. "And now?" he asked, his voice careful. Vanessa's eyes darted around the bar before she leaned in slightly. "I think he knows I know." Jamal's stomach clenched. That changed everything. Because a man like Michael Hastings, he wouldn't let loose ends walk away. Jamal exhaled, running a hand over his jaw. "What exactly do you want from me, Vanessa?" Her voice was quieter now, almost hesitant. "I need to get out, and I don't know how." Jamal studied her for a long moment. He had two choices: walk away, let her deal with the mess she had stepped into, or step in. And Jamal had never been the kind of man to ignore a fight worth taking. Jamal had spent most of his life making calculated decisions. Being a pilot meant mastering control, anticipating problems before they became disasters. But this was turbulence he hadn't planned for. Vanessa sat across from him, her fingers lightly tapping against her glass, the only sign of her nerves. She wasn't used to asking for help. That much was clear. He leaned back, keeping his voice level. "What exactly do you expect me to do, Vanessa?" She hesitated, then exhaled. "I don't know, I need someone I can trust." Jamal didn't react right away, because trust was a word that carried weight, and after everything that had happened between them, he wasn't sure she deserved his. But this wasn't about that anymore. This wasn't about the way she had handled their relationship or the way she had hidden him from her world. This was about something bigger. "How deep are you in?" he asked finally. Vanessa swallowed. "I don't know. I didn't sign anything. I didn't take any money. But I helped Michael connect with people. And now," she shook her head, "I think he knows I want out." Jamal's jaw tightened. That was bad. A man like Hastings didn't just let people walk away. "Has he threatened you?" "Not directly," she admitted, "but I know how this works. I've heard the stories. People who cross him don't just get cut off. They disappear." Jamal let that sink in. Vanessa was in real danger. And despite everything, despite how they had ended, he wasn't about to sit back and do nothing. He let out a slow breath. "All right." She looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. "All right, I'll help you." Relief washed over her face, but Jamal wasn't done. "But you do exactly what I say. No second guessing. No trying to handle this on your own. You understand me?" Vanessa nodded, looking at him in a way she never had before, like she truly saw him. Jamal pulled out his phone and sent a quick message. "Tyrese, need to talk." Now, because if they were going to take on Michael Hastings, Jamal was going to need backup. Jamal had learned a long time ago that when you step into a fight, you don't step in alone. That's why 20 minutes after leaving Vanessa at the lounge, he was pulling up to Tyrese's private hangar near Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. Tyrese had built a name for himself after leaving commercial aviation. His company specialized in high-end private charters, but beneath that, he had connections. The kind of people who knew how to dig up dirt, how to make problems disappear without a trace. Jamal stepped out of his car, spotting Tyrese near one of his jets, clipboard in hand. He looked up as Jamal approached, raising an eyebrow. "This gotta be serious if you're showing up unannounced," Tyrese said, setting the clipboard down. Jamal exhaled. "It is." Tyrese studied him for a second, then gestured toward his office at the back of the hangar. "Let's talk." Inside, the hum of airplane engines faded behind the soundproof walls. Tyrese poured them both a drink before leaning against his desk. "All right, what's going on?" Jamal took a slow sip before setting his glass down. "Vanessa's in trouble." Tyrese let out a short laugh. "Ain't that a surprise?" Jamal ignored it. "She got mixed up with Michael Hastings." Tyrese's smirk vanished. "Hastings?" He straightened. "As in that Hastings?" Jamal nodded. Tyrese cursed under his breath. "Man, tell me she didn't take money from him." "She says she didn't. Just made introductions, handled some small favors." Jamal met his gaze. "Now she wants out." Tyrese ran a hand over his face. "That's not how Hastings works." "I know." They sat in silence for a beat. Then Tyrese sighed. "You really planning to fix this?" Jamal's jaw tightened. "I'm not letting her get buried because of one bad decision." Tyrese shook his head but didn't argue. Instead, he pulled out his phone and started scrolling. Jamal watched him. "What are you doing?" "Calling in a favor," Tyrese said. "If Hastings is involved, we need eyes on him before he puts eyes on us." Jamal exhaled. This was getting real. Fast. And once they made this move, there was no turning back. Jamal had spent most of his life avoiding unnecessary risks. But this was different. Vanessa had made her choice. A bad one, no doubt. But Hastings wasn't the kind of man who let people make mistakes and walk away. If they didn't act fast, she'd be lucky to disappear quietly. Tyrese hung up his phone and exhaled. "I got a guy." Jamal raised a brow. "That's vague." Tyrese smirked. "For a reason. But trust me, if there's something to know about Hastings, he'll find it." Jamal nodded. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Tyrese sat back. "So what's the plan?" Jamal rubbed his jaw. He wasn't sure yet. He had never dealt with men like Hastings before. His battles had been in the air, where the only enemy was physics and time. But this was something else entirely. First, he needed to understand what they were up against. "We get intel," Jamal said finally. "Figure out how deep Vanessa's in. If she's just a loose end, maybe we can convince Hastings to let her walk." Tyrese gave him a look. "You really think that's how this works?" Jamal sighed. "Number. But I'm hoping I'm wrong." Tyrese tapped his fingers against the desk. "And if you're not?" Jamal's jaw tightened. "Then they'd have to play a different game." Tyrese smirked. "Man, I hope you know what you're doing." Jamal didn't, but he was about to find out. Later that night, Jamal pulled up outside Vanessa's apartment. She answered the door immediately, as if she had been waiting. "Did you talk to him?" she asked, barely letting him step inside. Jamal nodded. "We're working on it." Vanessa exhaled, tension still tight in her frame. "Jamal, if Hastings finds out—" "He already knows," Jamal cut in. "That's why you're scared." She swallowed. He wasn't wrong. Jamal stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You need to tell me everything, Vanessa. Every conversation, every favor, every dollar that moved through your hands." Her fingers tightened into fists at her sides. "I told you I didn't take any money." "I believe you," Jamal said. "But Hastings doesn't care about what you didn't do. He cares about what you know." Vanessa's face paled. Jamal nodded. "Yeah. So if you want to survive this, you need to stop holding back." She hesitated, then exhaled shakily. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll tell you everything." Jamal clenched his jaw, because something told him he wasn't going to like what he was about to hear. Jamal had always known that when people hesitated, they were deciding how much of the truth to tell. And right now, Vanessa was hesitating. They sat across from each other in her dimly lit apartment, the city's glow spilling in through the windows. Vanessa's fingers drummed restlessly against the edge of her glass. A tell. Jamal leaned forward. "Start talking." She took a slow breath. "It started as networking," she said. "Michael would introduce me to people, tell me they were potential clients or investors. At first, it was just connecting dots, introducing one person to another, passing along messages. Jamal stayed quiet, waiting. Vanessa bit her lip. Then a few months ago, he asked me to move some money. Jamal's stomach tightened. How much? She hesitated. Vanessa, she swallowed. 200,000. Jamal cursed under his breath. You didn't think that was worth mentioning sooner? I didn't take any of it, she snapped. It was just a transfer, through a corporate account. He told me it was an investment payout. Jamal shook his head. And you believe that? She exhaled sharply, standing up and pacing the room. I wanted to believe it. I didn't know who he really was back then. Jamal ran a hand over his face. Hastings had used her, plain and simple. And now, she was a loose end. Vanessa turned back to him. What do I do? Jamal exhaled, thinking. We need leverage. She frowned. Leverage? Jamal met her gaze. Something Hastings doesn't want getting out. Something that makes it more valuable to let you go than to get rid of you. Vanessa hesitated. He's careful. He doesn't leave trails. Jamal's jaw tightened. Then we make one. Her eyes widened slightly. You want to set him up? Jamal held her gaze. This wasn't about playing fair. This was about survival. I want to make sure he never comes after you again. Vanessa swallowed hard, because for the first time she realized just how far Jamal was willing to go. And maybe, just maybe, that scared her more than Hastings ever had. Jamal had never been a man who sought out danger, but when it came knocking, he never backed down. And now, it was time to end this. The setup Tyrese had come through. His contact had dug up just enough. Hastings had more than a few skeletons in his closet. Money laundering, offshore accounts, even whispers of people who had disappeared after getting in his way. Vanessa sat across from Jamal in a small diner just outside the city. She looked exhausted. So? She asked, voice low. What now? Jamal sipped his coffee. We put him in a position where backing off is his only option. She frowned. How? Jamal leaned in slightly. Hastings doesn't operate without protection. People like him always have someone above them. Bigger fish that don't like attention. If we leak just enough to make it look like he's sloppy, like he's drawing the wrong kind of heat. Vanessa's eyes widened. They'll cut him loose. Jamal nodded. And once that happens, Hastings will be too busy saving himself to worry about you. She exhaled, gripping the edge of the table. You really think this will work? Jamal studied her. She was still looking for certainty, for guarantees, but the world didn't work like that. It has to. The execution. That night, Jamal made the drop, a carefully crafted leak, just enough to stir the right people. And Hastings? He took the bait. Within 48 hours, the whispers started. Calls weren't being answered. Deals were suddenly off the table. Hastings wasn't the predator anymore. He was the prey. And just like that, Vanessa was no longer his problem. The goodbye Jamal met Vanessa one last time, standing outside an airport terminal as the early morning sun painted the sky in soft golds and blues. She looked at him carefully. So that's it? Jamal nodded. You're clear. A pause, then softer. And you? Jamal smirked slightly. I've got a flight to catch. She exhaled, glancing away for a moment before looking back. I never really saw you, did I? Jamal held her gaze. Number, but I think you do now. She nodded, swallowing hard. I won't forget this. Jamal stepped back, tipping his head slightly. Safe travels, Vanessa. She didn't stop him as he turned and walked toward the terminal. He didn't look back. The takeoff, Jamal stepped into the cockpit, sliding into his seat. The familiar hum of the engines, the weight of the controls. This was where he belonged. The past few weeks had been chaos, a fight he hadn't wanted but couldn't ignore. But now the sky was his again. As the plane lifted off, cutting through the clouds, he let out a slow breath. He had survived the storm, and the world had finally seen him for who he truly was, a man who never needed to prove himself to anyone. Sometimes the real test in life isn't about proving your worth. It's about seeing who values you without proof. Jamal never needed to hide who he was. He only needed to see who would stand beside him when the truth came out. This story isn't just about love, deception, or power. It's about knowing when to walk away and when to fight for what truly matters. So let me ask you, have you ever felt like someone judged you based on what they thought you had instead of who you really were? Tell us in the comments below. And if you love gripping stories like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because the next story, you won't want to miss it.